All right, let's dive into this. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are going to unpack one of the most monumental, completely world-altering, and honestly, highly debated events in all of human history. We're talking about the year 1492. Because, few moments have reshaped the globe quite as dramatically as Christopher Columbus's arrival in the Americas. And we aren't just here to recite a history book today. Instead, we're going to explore exactly how a purely accidental encounter across the Atlantic permanently wired together the fates of Europe, Africa, and the Americas. To really break down this pivotal moment, we'll follow a pretty straightforward path. Number 1, the catalyst. 2, the collision. 3, the Columbian Exchange. 4, the darker reality. And finally, 5, a contested legacy. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the catalyst, the voyage west. To really grasp 1492, we've got to set the scene back in 15th century Europe. So picture this. Columbus, a navigator from Genoa, wasn't actually looking for a new world. Actually, scratch that. He didn't even know it was there. He was desperately trying to find a Western maritime route to the spices, silks, and gold of India, China, and Japan. But to do that, he needed cash. After getting a hard no from Portugal, he pitches his idea to the Spanish monarchs, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Now, Spain had literally just finished the Reconquista, this centuries-long campaign to expel Muslims from the Iberian Peninsula. So they were primed, pumped up, and eager to fund a venture that could spread Christianity while simultaneously challenging Portuguese dominance in the East. They said yes, and the whole shebang was set into motion. Fast forward to August 3rd, 1492, Columbus sets sail from Spain with about 90 men across 3 very famous ships, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. For over 2 months, this crew just stared at an endless, terrifying ocean. They were incredibly anxious. They were legitimately afraid of mythical sea monsters and were teetering on the edge of a full-blown mutiny. But then, a breakthrough. At exactly 2 a.m. on October 12th, a sailor named Rodrigo de Triana, who was up in the Pinta, finally spotted land in the Bahamas. And that 2 a.m. sighting brings us straight into Section 2, the collision. 2 worlds meet. This is the exact moment of landfall where 2 totally isolated halves of the globe collide. Pretty much instantly, the geographical and cultural misunderstandings just explode. Columbus claims this Bahamian island and names it San Salvador, which means Holy Savior. But his critical error? His geography was completely off. Fully believing he had successfully reached the East Indies and Asia, he took one look at the native Taino people and labeled them Indians. It's a massive, massive misnomer, born out of total confusion, and yet it stubbornly persisted for centuries. To really get a feel for those very first moments, we can actually look directly at Columbus's own journal entries. He wrote that the Taino people brought them parrots, balls of cotton thread, and spears. He noted that they willingly traded everything they owned. From the Taino perspective, they were peaceful, they were generous, and they were intensely curious about these bearded strangers showing up in heavy metal armor. So that very first encounter, it was largely marked by trade and curiosity. But almost immediately, we see this really rapid, dark shift. In that exact same journal, Columbus takes note of their lack of iron weapons and writes this: "They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want." It's just a single, chilling realization recorded in ink, but it perfectly foreshadows the devastating mini-narrative that was about to unfold for the indigenous peoples of the Americas. Which naturally leads us right into Section 3, the Columbian Exchange, Global Ripple Effect. Because beyond that initial landfall, the most permanent consequence of 1492 was a biological and cultural shift that quite literally changed the Earth. We call this the Columbian Exchange, and we really need to pause here for a second. The true significance of Columbus's arrival wasn't a discovery. Millions of people already lived there. Instead, the real significance was the permanent connection of 2 previously completely separate halves of the globe. It was this massive, unprecedented transfer of plants, animals, cultures, ideas, and yes, diseases, right between the Old World and the New World. Now, what's really interesting about this breakdown is just how staggering the impact was. Looking at the items exchanged, the New World gave Europe and Africa some deeply transformative crops. Just think about this for a second. Before 1492, there were literally no tomatoes in Italian food, no potatoes in Ireland. Introducing the potato fueled massive population booms in places like Ireland and Germany, while maize became an absolute staple over in Africa. In reverse, the Old World brought wheat, sugarcane, and livestock to the Americas. The introduction of horses alone entirely revolutionized the way of life for Native American tribes on the Great Plains. Basically, our modern global diet and agriculture, they were born right here. However, we absolutely have to examine the horrific consequences that rode in alongside this agricultural exchange. And that brings us to Section 4, the darker reality, devastation. Because, as it turns out, the most devastating import from Europe wasn't a weapon or a specific policy. It was biology. Just look at the stark 90% slice on this chart. Diseases like smallpox, measles, influenza, and typhus absolutely swept through the continent. Because Native Americans had zero acquired immunity to these old-world pathogens, an estimated 90% of the indigenous population in some areas was just completely wiped out. This demographic collapse was unprecedented, and it made subsequent European conquest significantly easier. And sadly, the devastation wasn't only biological, it was highly systematic. Columbus became the first European to establish a permanent settlement in the Caribbean, acting as the governor of Hispaniola. And the historical record derived straight from his own writings details an incredibly brutal governance. The Taino people were violently subjugated. Those who didn't meet specific, strict gold quotas faced forced mutilation, literally having their hands cut off and being left to bleed to death. On top of that, thousands of natives were transported back to Europe as slaves. Within just a few short decades, this horrific combination of systematic violence, forced labor, and disease led to the near-total annihilation of the Taino population. Because of these deeply contrasting realities, the birth of our interconnected world, sitting right alongside the horrific destruction of indigenous civilizations, we arrive at our fifth and final section, a contested legacy, modern reckoning. For centuries, Western cultures kind of exclusively celebrated Columbus as this heroic explorer. He was the ultimate symbol of progress and the discoverer of America. We dedicated cities, streets, and an entire federal holiday to him. But modern scholarship has really brought these darker realities into the mainstream light. Today, a lot of institutions and cities have actually replaced Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day. It's a shift specifically designed to honor the millions of people who lived in the Americas long before 1492, and to actively reckon with the colonialism and genocide that followed. It's a profound, ongoing debate over what the word discovery even means. So, what does this all mean for us? Well, October 12th, 1492, ended the isolation of the Western Hemisphere forever. It completely reshaped human culture, agriculture, and our diets, while simultaneously opening the door to centuries of conquest, slavery, and destruction for indigenous peoples. That one tiny beach in the Bahamas literally forged the interconnected yet deeply unequaled global history that we all inherit today. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to chew on. How do we properly measure a legacy where two worlds collided, for better and for worse? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning the history that shapes our world.